Let's get into this, shall we? The year is 2011. Osama bin Laden has reportedly had his license to breathe revoked. The Fukushima nuclear power plant has went boom, effectively radiating what is more or less the entire ocean, and the AAC 300 Blackout cartridge has been introduced into the market. Now, while two of those events are arguably more impactful in terms of history, the 300 Blackout is no less remarkable in terms of its impact on the industry and the path it would pave for future cartridges to come. The 300 Blackout was originally designed in order to address some of the shortcomings of the 5.56 round while remaining within the M4 platform, with a primary focus on a larger caliber, improved ballistics out of a shorter barrel, and enhanced suppression. It's no wonder that special forces across the world were eager to adopt this cartridge early on, considering that many of the operators involved often find themselves in close quarters situations. A 16-inch barrel is certainly not ideal, nor is a round that has a tendency to zip through its intended target and potentially reach a subject it was not meant for. That's assuming that they even care, but that's an entirely different story. But that was then, and this is now, nearly a decade and a half later, a time period in which many cartridges have come and fallen to the wayside, which is exactly the point of today's video. After all these years, is the 300 Blackout still a viable round in today's market? Well, let's head out to the range and put that to the test. Several years ago, during the initial surge in popularity of the 300 Blackout, I decided to pick up this guy right here, the CMMG Descent Chambered In, you guessed it, 300 Blackout. At the time, I was looking for something to be suppressor dedicated for home defense that carried a little bit more oomph with a little less velocity and potential for pass-through compared to something like 5.56. And so, here we are. No regrets. All right, we're at 200 yards. We're going to go ahead and fire a shot here and then probably stretch it out a little bit further just to see where we start to run into trouble with 300 Blackout when we stretch it out to further distances. I am going to shoot from a rest. While I could hit this shot standing, I don't have a lot of ammunition for this video, so we're just going to go ahead and play it safe because this is more about ballistic capability, not my own. All right, so not much of a holdover. I did have to hold a little left, so there is some windage that's already starting to take effect, but overall, still pretty viable. All right, we're at 350 yards, which for most high caliber rounds is a pretty mid shot. However, as far as 300 Blackout's concerned, this is really where you start to see the round suffer. You have those increased holdovers, windage gets pretty wonky, and then when you push out beyond that, you're more or less just picking a spot completely off target and hoping for the best. All right, so as expected, once you start stretching out beyond 200 yards, you really have to start applying those holdovers. I was, for example, aiming over the top of the target, whereas at 200 yards, I was pretty much holding dead on. And that's something to really be considered with 300 Blackout, especially out of a short barrel like this. All right, despite my complete lack of desire in doing such, we're going to go ahead and rip a shot out to 400 yards on a 12-inch target, just for the sake of this video. The reason for my reluctance is, quite frankly, 300 Blackout has no business being stretched out this far. That's just how unstable this round becomes at such distances, and is exactly why I don't even bother writing a dope for shooting this range. The very next time I come out here, that dope may become worthless. Ask me how I know. Now, I know some of you may be saying, well, you just hit the 350 yard no problem. What's an extra 50 yards? And that is the exact point I'm here to prove, is that even such a small increment makes such a huge difference with this round. Alright, so as you can see, that took multiple rounds just to barely get on target. I mean, my holdover was so far left and so far above that it is just almost a miracle that I figured it out. So initially, based on the sound, I thought I had barely made contact, but it looks like we're just a little low left to center, and at 400 yards with 300 blackout, I'll take that all day. I can only assume the light ting is due to the fact that at 400 yards, 300 blackout has lost a great amount of its kinetic energy, so it's more or less just being lobbed up here at that point. Another notable thing about 300 blackout is how filthy it runs. Just look at all the powder burn on the casings. And if that's not enough, this thing was clean as a whistle when we started shooting today. And look at that carbon fouling in there. That receiver is just caked with carbon. And you'll really start to notice that because you'll start having that bolt kind of not want to go all the way into battery. So it's really like after 100 rounds or so, you're already seeing that much buildup, which is not great. So definitely something to consider. I'd like to take a moment to address something a little unorthodox from my typical presentation in my content, and that's actually a personal suggestion on how one should set up a rifle chambered in 300 blackout. Now, I understand that's highly controversial as personal preference varies wildly. However, with a round that is catered to such a specific dynamic, such as 300 blackout, I really think that my personal experience and these suggestions are something worth considering. Now, first and foremost is a rather easy one: to suppress or not to suppress. And as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to 300 blackout, there's no question. You gotta throw a suppressor on that bad boy. Not only is there a notable difference in performance, both in the obvious decibel reduction, but also recoil management and overall handling in general. But let's face it, guys, aesthetics play a part. And can you really tell me you don't want to throw a suppressor on this? Of course you do. So the other consideration I wanted to touch base on is a little bit more nuanced, so to speak, in terms of the end user and their intention with this cartridge, and that's going to be what optic to run on a 300 blackout. Now, for most folks, a red dot's going to be perfectly fine. Not only does that cater to what this round was really designed for, which is close quarters engagements, but in the right hands, a red dot's going to take you out to 100 yards, no problem. However, if you're somebody that likes to stretch it out a bit further, perhaps a red dot and a magnifier combo would not only be a primo choice, but perhaps the perfect middle ground for 300 blackout. Now, obviously, I went a completely different route with the LPVO and the canted red dot, but that's because not only is this a home defense weapon, but I also take it hunting once a year, and as I've said several times, I like to take this out to longer yards quite often. So I'm very accustomed with an LPVO, even using it as a red dot on 1x magnification, so it really doesn't bother me so much as it may some other people. But I've also become very proficient with that canted red dot. So let's say a situation arises, something goes bump in the night in the home, and I find myself with this weapon in a narrow hallway, I can easily revert to that canted red dot and have that open field of view and handle my business accordingly. Now, I understand that's not for everybody, but if you are interested in a setup like this, you can definitely make it work. Surprisingly small. I mean, it's hard to even see the exit channel. I was really hoping for more. There's our entry, and that bulge is the exit. Kind of underwhelming. So for my final thoughts on whether or not 300 Blackout is still viable in today's market, I say yes. Not only is it still raging in production in terms of companies producing rifles chambered in 300 Blackout, but also ammunition companies that have 300 Blackout as a mainstay, it's clearly withstood the test of time. Not only that, but it's a ton of fun to shoot, and I think it's very effective for its intended purpose. Overall, I think it's an awesome round that really lives up to its intent of design in terms of suppression, compact effectiveness, and still delivering that umph. So yeah, if you're in the market for a short boy that really packs a punch, 300 Blackout may just be for you. Most importantly, I'd like to thank you all for watching this video, especially those of you who have helped grow this channel by liking, subscribing, and commenting. Without your support, this would be nothing, so I sincerely thank you for that. That being said, if you'd be so kind to like, subscribe, and drop a comment, as well as turn on notifications for future videos so we can continue to grow this channel, that would be pretty rad. As always, cheers, and God bless. Like, subscribe, and turn on those notifications, because you never know, I might just start giving stuff